such a time as this.
And welcome back to For Such a Time as This, the place where there is no such thing as a silent witness. Want to start off with a text, and it's very clear. How can I say this? There's some very clear evidence as it pertains to Jordan Peterson and his I don't want to say claim to Christianity, but his flirtation with Christianity. He defines God as someone's conscience. So with that in mind, let us look at the text. 1 Kings 19:11, and he said, "Go out." God is speaking to the prophet Elijah. And he says, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it into pieces, the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. The sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It's a good story, historically accurate story about Elijah and his interaction with the Lord. Jordan Peterson had something he put up on the internet. He was debating 20 atheists, and it was very telling. I think some of the young atheists got the best of Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson actually got up and walked out of anger because I think some of those young guys were taking it to him. I'll be honest with you. Look, I'm not Jordan Peterson. To his credit, he does not claim to be a Christian, and that debate or that interaction he doesn't. It's in the description here. The debate he's not claiming to be a Christian. Matter of fact, they call him a Christian, and he pushes back, says, "I never said you said I'm a Christian. I'm not a Christian." It seemed to be his debating skills were exaggerated because he wasn't that good. But as he's defining to this young man who God is, look at this. Look at this.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined it.
Okay, so as Elijah defines God.
It's defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God, and that goes back to my opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so
in Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
it's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the major Old Testament prophets.
All
right? He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being...
One, Elijah is not equal in stature to Moses. He is not. He's up there. But if you look at Moses' epitaph, look at how God described Moses. He says there has never, nor will there ever be a prophet like Moses. But anyway, he Jordan Peterson says that God is someone's conscience. It's defined, that the Old Testament defines God as the conscience within. No. Look at verse 12. After the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. And then he takes this next verse and describing the way God revealed himself to Elijah. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in the cloak, stood out in the entrance of the cave, and behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Where are you getting this concept of the inner voice or the conscience? A low whisper that God now talks to him through a voice. How are you saying that somehow this voice is the conscience within? That was just one of the many misstatements of Jordan Peterson when it comes to Scripture and God. But again, Jordan Peterson is who he is. There's some things he does and says that I do like. But some people, I've heard the question more than one from more than a few different people. Is Jordan Peterson a Christian? This last debate he has, this last rendition of Jordan Peterson as he debates 20 atheists, the question, and sometimes I was like, I don't know Jordan Peterson. Now I can say I know Jordan Peterson is no Christian. Maybe he's a good man, maybe he's a good moral man, I don't know him. But Jordan Peterson, he doesn't know the God of the Bible.
For such a time as this,